Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I am also the host of the podcast, so I get to do lots of fun things. Today is August 20th, and this is actually a special episode. As many of you know, we are a bi-weekly podcast, but lately it seems like we've been weekly because we've had a lot of special things that we wanted to share. And as you may know, our regular podcast every other Thursday for us here in the United States. Of course, if you're in New Zealand or Australia, I guess it's technically Friday, but we do this every other Thursday here in the U.S. and sometimes on the weeks in between, we have special episodes because there is something special that we need to share with you, and we need to share it with you right now. And that's why we're here. We have those special episodes when somebody has a new book or there's an event or there's something that's just timely and relevant to the moment in time. And I'm really excited today because we have with us a friend, an author, a civil rights advocate, and human rights advocate, somebody that's been doing some amazing work. We've got Borden King joining us to talk about a brand new book called The Informed Parent. So Ann will be here in just a moment, but before we get started, if this happens to be your first time here, welcome. Glad to have you here. We always love having new people joining our community. If you are a returning member of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint community and you come and you listen to our podcast on a regular basis, thank you for being here. We appreciate you being part of the community. It's great to see the names and faces of familiar people. I get to see them kind of in the little comments section here. So again, whether you're new or joining us again, thanks for being here. And if you're watching on a platform like Facebook or YouTube that allows you to put a comment in the chat, if you put a comment in the chat and let us know who you are and where you're from, it's always fun to see where people are joining us from. So I would ask you to consider doing that and letting us know who you are and where you're from. If you're not familiar with the Alliance, if this is your first time here, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint is a small national nonprofit based in the United States. Actually, in Maryland is my home. And we do a lot of work around trying to reduce punitive and exclusionary discipline, outdated behavior management, trying to steer kids away from the school to prison pipeline. We do a lot of work around legislation and policy and education. Again, we are a small nonprofit, but trying to have an impact. So anyway, check out our website, which is nseclusion.org. So again, we have a special episode for you today, and I'm going to go ahead and add to the stage here our special guest. And Ann, I'm going to read your bio here. Ann Borden King is a Toronto-based podcaster, writer, and human rights advocate. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Healthy Debate, and Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, among other publications. She is the host of Noncompliant, and you know how I got to be a guest on that once. I love the title Noncompliant because you know how I feel about compliance. Noncompliance is a popular podcast about neurodiversity. Her Substack is entitled The Children Do Not Consent. A co-founder of Austics for Autistics, the Canadian Autistic Self-Advocacy Organization, and has presented before the United Nations and the Canadian Senate, among others, about autism policy. She is the founder of the Autistic Health Access Project, which educates medical students and clinicians about making healthcare accessible for autistic patients. And of course, we are here today to talk about, your current book, but you also have a book, Children Do Not Consent, which that's available on your Substack. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And encourage people to check that out. So at any rate, some great information there. And Ann has been a guest here on the podcast before. We've also done a previous book study with you. And all the things in your bio, I mean, you're missing some important things, like you're my friend, Ann. I'm excited to see you here today. You and I have been connected for a number of years, and I've always appreciated very, very deeply the work that you do, the change that you've helped to bring about, not only in Canada, but across the world. So it is a pleasure to have you here today. And we are really excited to talk about your brand new book here. So welcome.
Thank you. And it's really an honor to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Always love having conversations with you. And, there's so much that I've learned from you as well in, getting to read, whether it's your articles or your books. Of course, you have a fantastic book about ABA, and we did a book study about that. But it really is a pleasure to have you here, and we're really excited. Do want to let you know again, if you're watching live, and you happen to be watching on YouTube or Facebook or even LinkedIn, leave us a comment in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from. It's always great to see where people are joining us from here today. And so brand new book, and you put this together in what seemed to be a remarkably short period of time for me, because I'm struggling to finish my book, as you know. But it is out, and I get to hold a copy of it. I actually got an early copy, but is it shipping now? I think I saw people were starting to receive it.
I'm getting mine tomorrow. So
okay. Yeah, I thought Friday was the date that it was supposed to ship, but I've noticed some people on Facebook actually putting pictures up of the book. So I thought that was really exciting. So the book is called The Informed Parent: A Decision-Making Guide to Autism Services and Advocacy. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about the why. Why you decided to write this book. You've obviously been writing many things for many years, but this is a book that I think exists because you probably saw a need in the world. But tell me why you decided to write this book, and why you decided to write it now.
Right. Well, my first book was a critical history of ABA, and my second book was about autism cure scams. These were more like investigative, but I really wanted to write something that would be more like a tool book. And for parents who want to advocate, I also really wanted to create a book that encourages parents to believe in their own family, because I think some of the books in this autism space tend to pivot a lot to therapists and teachers. And it's so important for us all to have confidence in our own decisions, especially when we're being second guessed. So I designed the book to be a decision-making guide where I talk to a lot of different experts and provide information for parents as they make these crucial decisions themselves. Because really, the most important thing that happens in our kids' lives is the decisions that we make.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not an easy journey sometimes as a parent. I mean, and the book really begins. I mean, you begin right at the start of this for many families, kind of diagnosis in the early years, finding a path together. As a parent, perhaps that has a child that is diagnosed as autistic, what does that mean? What do you do? There's of course, a whole slew of medical advice that might come your way. And of course, there may be other people that offer their own well-intended advice, some of which may be useful and some of which may not be so useful. But let's walk through a little bit of this book. Tell me a little bit, kind of in chapter 1, diagnosis in the early years, finding a path together. What are you trying to kind of lay the foundation for here?
I'm trying to lay some of what I mentioned earlier, the confidence foundation, and for parents to not just trust your gut, but find ways to tune in with your own child as these decisions are being made, so that it's truly what's best for your child and your family, as opposed to just following. I know when my son was diagnosed, we just were told, you have to do this. If you don't do this, this window will shut. And what they were telling us we had to do was ABAs, and we wanted to do something different. So we ended up turning to other parents and trying to find a way that way. So how do you sometimes make decisions that might not be the popular decision? And then most important of all, I think in the early years chapter is talking about how to connect with your child and to really teach others to connect with your child, because autistic kids communicate differently. They feel things differently. They express themselves physically differently. And there's a lot of stigma around that even today. So how do we not only connect with our own kids, but interpret to others what our kids are all about? Because having friends is so important. Belonging is so important. Being able to go to the neighborhood playground, being able to go to the neighborhood kids hang out at the library, story time. How do we interpret and explain all of that to people so that we make sure our kids are included right from the start?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things I think that you did in the kind of beginning of this book, really setting the foundation for parents is one, believe in your own ability, believe in your child. But I'm a big fan of curiosity on many, many levels. But one of the things you talk about is like important questions to ask. And even more important than what questions to ask is the fact that you're asking questions. It's easy to become a consumer of information when you find yourself in this situation and just be bringing it all in. But it's really critical that parents are asking questions, right? So, what was your advice there in terms of, kind of encouraging parents to ask questions and try to understand the options out there? Often, how I feel about compliance, because you and I are very aligned in this, as can be seen by the name of your podcast there. But one of the things that comes along with having a compliance-based world is, even as adults, we are sometimes conditioned to listen to what a medical professional says and not question it, right? To listen to that and not to follow our instincts. So tell me a little bit about why it was so important to make that point to parents about asking questions and about believing in themselves and their child.
It was really important to me. And I mean, some of it goes back to my own background. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, which you'd see bumper stickers everywhere that said, question authority. I think it is really important to question authority. And I really get into that in my last chapter, where I talk about the history of the autism diagnosis. I put it at the end for all the geeks who really want to read the history. But it's very, very important, because we can see through the course of the diagnosis of autism how much the experts got wrong. And then they had to change their minds. They had to pivot. This is a complicated condition that is not always that well understood. And so understanding that just because someone is speaking from a position of authority doesn't mean it's the right place or the right person. For example, one bit of advice that I give, and I think I gave it a few times because I feel it so strongly, is that if you are looking at like a therapy center or a daycare or a school, and they don't allow the parents in, that was one thing I really, that's really a red flag. Because when we hear cases here in Ontario, and I'm sure in the United States as well, when we hear cases of abuse in these settings, these are settings that are very closed off, because that's where it happens, when there isn't the transparency, when the parents can't come in. It's very important to be working hand in hand with the provider and to be able to be a part of it as the parents. So I really advise people in that regard to watch out for people who demand an extremely high level of trust, when it would be really, there's no reason why they wouldn't be transparent.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds so simple, but I think that idea of transparency over trust is important. I mean, and trust is something, in my opinion, that you build as well, and you build it by having transparency, by being able to understand kind of what things look like. And I agree with you. Even in school settings, it's amazing how many times, we've seen roadblocks to letting parents see a setting. A school district may want to send a kid to a setting, and then the parents aren't able to go see that setting, or they can only see that setting for a very small window while staff sit next to them in a very,
Right.
and those kind of things, I agree, should be red flags. In this first chapter, there's a number of other things you do. You begin to talk about kind of separating facts from pseudoscience, understanding autism research trials. Why are these things important to a parent on their journey?
Well, I think they're very important because we know in this society that we live in, that children have a right to privacy, they have a right to safety, they have a right to communicate, and they have a right to quality of life. These are not rights that begin when a person turns 18. These are rights that are for children. So when we look at something like medical trials, or something like extracting DNA from autistic children, which they wanted to extract DNA from about 20,000 autistic children in the United States and Canada, I got the pitch when my son was diagnosed. It was not the person who pitched this to take his DNA to put in an autism DNA database. It wasn't presented honestly to me. It really wasn't. I was told, we didn't do it, but because I saw the bumper sticker to question authority. But a lot of people did do it because they were misled. They were told that if you give your child's DNA That's a free way that you can find out if they have other genetic disorders. So just do it. But the fact of the matter is, when people put their child's DNA into an autism DNA database, that's medical privacy of their child. That's their child's own, private medical records. They may be 3 or 4 when you do it, but one day they're going to be 18, and they might not like the fact that their DNA is in a database. So that's just one example of something that you have to think through and think, really center the child in this and say, well, they can't consent right now. Would they consent? Would they want this? And no one's really telling you to think about these things unless you listen to your podcast or are really connected. So I wanted to make sure that was included in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a lot of really valuable information, kind of in that first chapter, kind of, covering the early years, kind of from diagnosis. As we get into chapter 2, you get into kind of life at home and in the community, and you cover a number of things. You talk about milestones and priorities. You talk about what to know, sensory signals and behavior. Finding respite. Talk to me a little bit about this second chapter and what you really wanted to convey to families and what you wanted them to know. The other thing I'll mention here is that, when you wrote this, you wrote it in such a way that, at least from what I was able to tell, systems may vary from Canada to the United States to the UK, but you wrote this in a way that really felt inclusive of, wherever you might be, that these are some of the things that you might be up against. So tell me a little bit more about that chapter, if you would, kind of, life at home and in the community.
Yes. Well, I would start with life in the community. And I think particularly at all times in life, but I was focusing a lot on the early years in this particular section of the book. It can be really shocking and lonely when you have a child diagnosed with autism and you weren't expecting it, and you're surrounded by peers whose kids appear to be neurotypical. There's all kinds of events to go to. There's all kinds of things that you're doing, and you feel very lonely because it can be very isolating, can be very stigmatizing. It's not, I don't think it's the fault of autism. I think it's people's lack of understanding or imagination about autism that really creates that stigma against our families. So how do we get our kids to be able to go to whatever it is that we wanted to do, whether it's a meetup or church or anything like that? How do we get the grocery store, right? How do we get other people to understand the ways that our kids are moving or speaking or things like that? So I tried to offer some practical tips for that. And also, I think a sense of every parent I know who's been through these years, myself included, you have to start to build up a kind of inner resilience. And that really comes from connecting with and honoring your kid's reality. You can slow down. Slowing down is such a huge, huge part of it. And it might feel at first like you might resist it because the world around you is telling you everything has to go according to these timelines and these, I'm forgetting the word right now, the milestones, right?
Right.
But if you let go of the milestones and you say, this is an opportunity for me too. It's an opportunity for us to slow down. So whether you're slowing down and, hey, let's spend a half an hour watching an inchworm on a stick or whatever. Well, what do you get from that? Like, you actually get a lot of peace and quiet and calming down and co-regulating and connecting. And it's not the picture of how maybe you thought it was going to be, but it's actually like a really beautiful and wonderful thing. So I was trying to get that across as well to combat the real reality is that it can be harsh. It can be very, very difficult, particularly in the community setting. So then how do we, like I said, build that kind of inner resilience and also find ways to connect? Every time we connect, we're building, it's like stepping stones to a better future as well.
Mm-hmm. And another thing in this chapter is, finding respite in times of stress, right? As a caregiver, as a parent, we have to take care of ourselves to be able to support our children. So tell me a little bit about why that's so important in this journey.
It's so important, and it's the thing that people put off. And it's not that people don't want to get respite. It's that it can be hard to get respite.
Right.
You might think you can just hire the girl from down the street to babysit. And she comes over and I'll speak from my own experience, like a deer in the headlights. Like, what? You don't play with cars? You're like, what? You want to line things up? And you have to set everything up and say, like, actually, he really likes lining things up. You guys could have a lot of fun lining things up together. And some people just can't roll with that. And then you're on to babysitter number 2, you're on to babysitter number 3. And you start to feel like, oh, like nobody can do this as good as me. I'm going to have to do everything. I'm going to have to teach him to swim. I'm going to have to show her how to learn how to do this and how to do that. But if you never let go and you take everything on, it's not sustainable for the parent. It's also not sustainable for the child. There's this incredible dyad that happens, or triad that happens, but sometimes you got to break it up for everybody's sake. So how do you do that? And I offered some little tips on how to educate, for example, how to educate a babysitter, how to educate someone who's running a library program, or things like that, so that you can just go, oh, I dropped her off. I get a break. I'm going to have my coffee in the car, and she's getting a break too, because it's really important. That isolation of families is very, very real. And I'm also hoping that therapists who read my book will think about that as well, and really take that into account in terms of the quality of life of the family, that it can't be postponed, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you covered a lot of ground in this, in this book, as a parent myself, and having been through some of this journey, some of this was representative things that I've gone through. Right. But I have to tell you, Ed, I mean, I kept learning things as I was reading the book, and was like, oh gosh, I haven't really thought about that. And again, early in chapter 2, you talk about informed choices, preparing for the future. You talk about kind of this idea, what's next, support through life. Talk to me a little bit more, because we very quickly progress, not only from kind of the early years, but thinking about kind of the role of family long term as well. So tell me a little bit about those sections of the book as well, if you would.
Yes, because as if you don't have enough on your plate as the parent of a young or newly diagnosed child, you have to start thinking about the future fairly early on. And I touched on it a bit in terms of talking about what kind of financial planning you have to do. We don't know when a child is diagnosed. One doesn't know what the outcomes are going to be 10 or 15 years later. So what needs to be put into place to secure a financial future, to secure a housing future? The reality is there are wait lists for supportive housing. The reality is it's hard without having savings. And so how can you save what you can to put it towards supportive housing? There's this thing that people call the disability cliff, which is when a child is young and they go to school every day, and they have supports at school, and they have a community of friends at school as well. They also have support workers at school, and then they graduate from high school. That's when people say they've fallen off a disability cliff, or really any disability. And so that transition from high school to adulthood is an intense transition. It really is for anyone, but it specifically has specific meaning for someone who has a disability, particularly a developmental disability and or autism. So the book really talks a little bit about how you can set things up, and how you can have the mindset for that moment when they're transitioning from being dependent in the home and a child where everyone that age is dependent, towards adulthood, which will look different than their peers.
Right. Yeah. This certainly is a book that I wish I had many years ago. But again, you cover so much ground in this. I want to move on in kind of getting into the third chapter here, where you talk about the school years. One of the things that we both probably know well is that these can be some of the most challenging years, especially initially. Advocating for your child, if they have an education, individual education plan of some kind, what your role is in that. And, you start this chapter, kind of talking about inclusion and finding an inclusive school. So why don't we start there? Why don't we start there when it comes to school? What's some of the advice you really wanted to get out there to parents and the informed parent regarding school and regarding education?
Well, I mean, one, you have to be flexible. So many families, as you know, I work in advocacy in Canada. Some families will just move. They'll move province, they'll move across the country, or they'll just move to another town. they do the research and try to find a school that's most inclusive. And sometimes that involves making a change. Sometimes most of the time, all the time, it also involves advocating. So it's a strategy. It's like you might as well be at a giant table with doing like Cold War nuke talks when you go to an IEP meeting, because every word you say and your tone and everything is very, very important for keeping the person on the other side of the table happy, which is the school administrator or the IEP lady. Like, how do you get what you want? Well, you have to keep your requests simple enough that you're not overwhelming them. If you're an autistic parent, you might feel like, oh, I've got these 30 papers that would be really helpful for them to learn, because I like to read 30 papers, but they don't want to read 30 papers. So how do you break it down into 4 simple steps for keeping my kid happy in school and making sure my child is included? How do you have great toolkits on the AASR website in terms of agreements that parents can bring to an IEP meeting to ensure that their child is not put into seclusion room, to ensure that there are guidelines or a restriction on restraint. These are all things that you have to negotiate, and you have to do it with like a big smile on your face. It's difficult. And so there's some tips on how to do that, as well as I included a section for homeschooling parents, because homeschooling's not a walk in the park either. There are a lot of different things to navigate if you choose to homeschool. And the thing that I really tried to do in the book is to recognize that people's circumstances are all very different, and they make choices to school or homeschool. I don't think there needs to be a cookie cutter approach to what kind of schooling people choose, whether it's specialized, mainstream, or homeschooling. So I addressed all of the methods of schooling and talked to different education inclusion experts, as well as occupational therapists, speech therapists, about how to try to launch this as best as possible.
Yeah. And I mean, so many individual differences there as well. I mean, certainly, there are families that homeschooling may be an option. There are other families that may not even be something that's on the table. And it's really difficult to navigate the options out there. And, again, I mean, there are some people that might have the ability to pick up and move across the country, but, for many, that would be something that would be impossible. And it really does create a challenge for sure. I love that part of this chapter, and you hit it a second ago, when a parent is autistic, managing communications with the school. I love that you hit on that, because, one of the things that I've found, and I'm going to think you're probably going to agree with me, but maybe not, is that in doing this work, the work that we do at the Alliance, of course, a lot of it is around restraint seclusion, but more broadly, it's also around a lot of other school discipline, but even more broadly, it's really about all the things that get done to kids in the name of behavior. And there, of course, we know there are certain kids that are far more likely to be represented, and it's often kids with disabilities, often neurodivergent kids. Autistic children make up a large portion of the students and the families that we support here. And what's really interesting to me, I think even more so over the last few years, I guess I've really seen it, more and more, is how many parents of autistic children somewhere far later in life receive their own diagnosis and find out that they're autistic. Maybe they're 40 years old or 50 years old or 60 years old when they're diagnosed, and suddenly a lot of other things make sense for them. But kind of looking at this, I mean, as a parent that is advocating for their own child, I love that you kind of included that, when a parent is autistic. I mean, thinking about, how we manage communication and work with teams, because that certainly can be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you have to delegate, and hopefully you have a supportive family that might even include extended family members. There's probably one person who's better at talking to the school than someone else is. It certainly was the case for me. I was not the one who should go to the school meetings. So I delegated that away, and that can be really helpful to also understand your strengths and your weaknesses. The funny thing that I do hear, I just had coffee with someone this week actually who was saying she thinks her husband is on the spectrum, but he doesn't think he is. And some of his pushing for conformity for their child might be a reflection of the fact that everyone pushed him to conform, and his
Right.
anxieties. Well, if I have a non-conforming child, what's going to happen to him? These anxieties are very real and very important to acknowledge, to try to address without being judgmental or pedantic, because
Mm-hmm.
they're real. Everyone wonders and worries whether their child is going to launch. So how is that balanced out with the reality of what challenges they need,
Sure.
and maybe what challenges they can't handle? It's very individual.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other portion of this book that I think is really critical, because despite all of our best intentions and despite all of our hard work to work with the team at the school, sometimes things don't go well. And you've got a section here about when you disagree with the school. Many parents find themselves in that situation, and of course, when you disagree, you have every reason to disagree. You have every reason to be very passionate about it as well. But sometimes that passion can get in the way when you're trying to advocate for your child, because you're so, you become very emotional about it as well. So you tell me, I mean, what are the things that you recommend for parents when they reach that point that they realize there's a disagreement? How can parents more effectively work with their teams to try to get their children what they need?
Well, I think first of all, and I explain this in the book, there needs to be an understanding of the protocol for complaints. So if you have a complaint, you need to understand these are institutions. They think like an institution. They are like corporations, right? You go here, and then you go here, and then you go here, and then you go here.
Bureaucracy, right?
Understand that chain of command, and you have to work with that. You can't just go straight to the top, because it won't go anywhere. So understanding the first point of contact that you need to make, and trying to go through all of those steps. And I think we talk a lot about masking, and how masking can be very difficult for a person's masking being just putting on a front, right? And how autistic people mask for the world a lot of times to try to fit in. To some degree, everybody masks, whether they're autistic or not. And it's important to always stay in touch with who you are. But one thing that one does with masking is sometimes it's strategic. And so sometimes strategically, you have to say and do things that you normally wouldn't say and do, such as the compliment sandwich, where you walk in and you make sure to first compliment the teacher, and then you get to like the like meat, or like the like whatever vegan patty of the sandwich, and that's your complaint. And then you put the other piece of bread on it, which is the other compliment. Now, it's not a natural way of being. I think particularly as an autistic person, let's just get down to basics here. I'm not bothering with this stuff, but you do have to bother with it. You do have to be strategic and really think it through. And you can often get your way, like you catch more flies with honey. So then you also have to know what's your line in the sand as well. I mean, going in with a strategy doesn't mean just putting up with a bunch of bullshit that your kid has to go through either. So there certainly are times when one will need to go to a human rights tribunal, or will need to go to the district. And there are cases where people have to file class action lawsuits or individual lawsuits. So there's a bit in the book about that as well, and what kind of a firm can handle that kind of complaint. So
Yeah, well, here at the Alliance, we have kind of what I call the 5 principles, our principles of what we think are important in supporting kids, kind of that trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative. One of the things I feel really strongly about is these principles that are so important in supporting and working with children. They're also important when working with any other human being. And although an IEP team meeting can be a really difficult situation. I mean, there's nothing more challenging in my mind than being a parent and listening to 4 people report about how your child is failing to meet, these goals, and, how hopeless they seem. There's nothing harder than being in that. But I think at the same time that the things that we can do to deliberately build relationships and collaborate are critical, right? So taking some of those principles into the work that we do, I think, again, sometimes it feels adversarial, but where we're able to cultivate relationships, even if it's not with everybody in the team, because maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe there are people on the team you're never going to build a relationship with, but one or two people on the team, building a relationship with them, getting them at some point. And I've been there where despite the person leading the meeting in the direction they're clearly trying to head, the person you built a relationship with on the team is putting their neck out for you and agreeing with you, despite the fact that, and that happens in that context. So I think for families, it's always important to kind of keep in mind, like, the way that we work with others and the way we want people to work with us. And again, it is a hard situation to be in, but it's one that really requires us sometimes to be able to compartmentalize some of the emotions we may feel. I remember one of the first books I read when I started really diving into the law here in the United States was one of Pete Wright's books, Emotions to Advocacy. This idea of, okay, well, how do we take all these things we feel, and then how do we effectively advocate? Because that's an important journey, and it does not necessarily come naturally.
No.
Yeah.
Right. It's like Mr. Rogers says, look for the helpers. So
right.
You are looking for allies, and you're looking for friends wherever you can find them, for sure.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I've been in meetings where, and even thinking about a 504 meeting I was in at one point where, at some point there was, kind of an ally there that was really helping to turn the tide of the conversation, because very clearly the person running the meeting wanted to do all they could to take away supports and accommodations. And we do that for all the kids. And when you look across the table and see the staff making a reaction and then supporting what you say, it's really important. So that's hard work, but important work. So a lot in this chapter. We then kind of go into what comes next from teen to adult, and then kind of this chapter 4 is after 18, challenges and new directions. And of course, every stage brings its own unique challenges. And of course, you talked about the cliff a moment ago, so we'll dive into that in a moment. I do want to remind people, if you are watching live right now, feel free to let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. And I saw a couple of people had jumped on. In fact, it looks like our friend Alex here, who says, I did an endorsement of the book too. So Alex jumped on here. And our friend Julie from the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective was talking about quality of life, and has another comment here, which I just moved past. There we go. Often the person agreeing with you is a therapist or teacher, and it's a scary sticking your neck out. Oh, right, of course. When the admin is disagreeing with the parent, and absolutely, I've seen that, and from my experience, I often find it's the social worker, or it's somebody that is willing to stick their neck out, and that's not an easy position to be in by any means, but it can really change a tide. And again, valuing that relationship, I think, can be really important. Again, I want to remind everybody, the name of the book is The Informed Parent. I think the official release date is tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, although I'm lucky enough to have this early copy here, and I think a couple of other people have started getting copies, so it seems like it is out there, and people are beginning to get it. And of course, and where can you get the book? And we have viewers from all over, so where can they get the book if they're interested in getting a copy?
So it's available in the United States through Barnes & Noble and through Amazon. And in Canada, it's available Chapters Indigo and Amazon. In Europe, it's through, I believe it's called McNally, and some of the other major sellers, as well as Amazon. And then you can always go to a bookstore. I'm really also encouraging people, if you feel like you just want to read it, flip through it, take some notes, but you don't want to buy it, ask your library to get a copy. Libraries are very, very amenable to picking up one copy of a book for you. All you have to do is Google it's called the ISBN number. I'll put it in the chat. You can find out what the ISBN number of the book is. And
is that number right on the back here?
I think it is. Yes,
okay,
I think it is. So, and you can Google to find it, or even just the name and the author. The librarian, they love to look things up.
Oh, look at that. We've got it. Courtney is on it. It looks like we've got the ISBN number. Yeah, and the great thing about getting it into a library is not only do you get a chance to read it, it is there on the shelf and there for another parent. And sometimes that book that's sitting on the shelf that could be a lifeline to somebody. It really could. So I love the idea. I would say, in fact, you correct me if you think I'm getting a little too carried away here, but I would say, even if you want to buy a copy, go to your local library and ask them to get a copy, because then you are paying it forward. You're doing something that might help somebody else as well. So consider that. That's a great option. I really like that you mentioned that. But again, want to encourage people, you can pre-order your copy today, and want to encourage you to do that. And we're going to get into a little bit more here. Just a couple of other folks that have jumped on. Chantel, another Canadian here, and our lead Canadian volunteer. And Chantel is here. We also have Brenda Davis here from Ontario. Great to have you here as well. So thanks for joining us. So let's dive in a little bit further here. I want to get into after age 18, challenges in new directions. So talk to me a little bit. You mentioned some of them already, but you really go into a broad, a broad area. You talk about diagnosis and disclosure. You talk about sex, drugs. You talk about higher education. Finding and keeping a job. Talk to me about that chapter and what you think is really important for the informed parent to know to better support their kids and their family.
Definitely. And this chapter was very interesting for me to write, because in my previous chapters, I was mainly speaking with experts in childhood who had done research. For this chapter, I could actually look at some of the research that I've been involved with. I've been involved with autonomy research for young adults with Jackie Ryan at the University of Alberta, as well as with the Center for Sexuality Education that's a group that works closely with the Canadian government. And so over the years, through these various projects that we've been involved with, we've been talking with people with intellectual disabilities, young people, like young adults with intellectual disabilities, and young autistic adults about their feelings about autonomy. Autonomy is being able to make your own choices and the right to make your own choices. We're all obviously born with autonomy. We should be able to make our own choices. And the thing about being someone who is with a developmental disability or autistic is that you don't get to always make all of your own choices, and people are trying to make choices for you. And we have to always look at what are the boundaries around that. When is it reasonable? Obviously, when someone's a child, their parents are making a lot of choices for them. Then you become an adult. There's an emotional hurdle that parents face when their child becomes a young adult, recognizing they want to do their own things. And you don't have that same sense of being able to tell them what they can and can't do. One thing that I found through the study, I led focus groups amongst Canadian autistic young adults, I believe it was up to age 23, asking them about sex and sexuality. Many of them said that in their education, whether they were in like a blended or a segregated classroom, they didn't learn really about some really key concepts like consent, sex, protected sex, things that are really important to know about. Not learning about these things, however, did not stop them from pursuing sexual relationships or, unfortunately, facing the reality of being sexually harassed by others. All it did was it made them not able to have the tools they needed to communicate around sex, to communicate their boundaries and to communicate their consent and to understand consent. So some of them got into really, really, really bad situations because they didn't have the same level of sexuality education that other young people had gotten. So in the urge to protect them, it ended up that they were being infantilized in a way that was really, really unrealistic. It's very hard for a parent to think of their child as doing certain things like having sex or drinking or getting drunk, but these are things that people want to do when they're young adults. So how do you manage that? The other group I did was the group out in Alberta. They were in a day program, students, young adults in a day program. And there was one guy in the day program who wanted to try drinking. And so but parents often don't want their kids to try drinking if they have an intellectual disability, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to do it. So do they have the right to do it? I mean, what would happen if you gave this kid a drink? Like, these are conversations that people working in a day program might have trouble getting back to what you said earlier. They might have trouble even addressing that with the parents. Hey, maybe your kid can watch movies that aren't just G-rated anymore. And yeah, maybe they'll blurt something out, but they're also 22 years old and their bodies are just like any other 22-year-old. So how do you mitigate all of that? And this is really an emerging area. Jackie Ryan's done some really great research on it. If you look into Jackie Ryan and her team to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And, you know, again, there's a lot of, there's more out there written about supporting the school years and you know, kind of the early years. And of course, there's some good things and bad things out there. But, you know, when it comes to some of these things, I mean, you know, I think there's not a lot of good information, and you know, some of these topics don't seem to get covered in the way that they need to. So some really important issues. You know, you dive into things like higher education and finding and keeping a job. You know, talk to me a little bit about that. You know, what's some of the advice for the informed parent in terms of thinking about things like higher education and finding jobs?
This is where hopefully your role modeling in the IEP meetings when the child was present of the strategic approach can help the student when they go off to higher education, when they have to be at the accommodation meeting, when they meet with the school and say, I need this note-taking accommodation or whatever accommodation they need, practicing, role-playing, really working on self-advocacy skills, because the expression that we use here in Canada is just enough support. Mm-hmm. Don't over-support, like just enough, but then let them do as much as they possibly can, even if it's making mistakes along the way, God forbid, right? To get them to advocate for themselves as much as possible is, as you know, through your work, the best way for people, number one, to stay safe, but also to have a quality of life and a real feeling of autonomy and a real feeling like I can do this. These are especially the years of all to really try to encourage that feeling in higher education in terms of getting accommodations. And then in terms of the world of work as well, it's difficult if someone went through, say, an ABA upbringing where they were rewarded for always complying. Right. Then they go to work. They go to work and their boss wants them to work 12 days in a row. And they've been taught, they didn't necessarily learn how to say, I can't work 12 days in a row, or I won't work 12 days in a row. Right. These are the kind of advocacy skills that they may not have yet. So how do we make sure that they have them?
Yeah, you know, I often think about how compliance-based approaches, how approaches that rely on rewarding you for ignoring your internal feelings and sensations and your wants, how those can make children down the road vulnerable to different kinds of abuse. And you know, of course, I think about different kinds of abuse. But, you know, I'd never really thought about that in the context of, I guess, employment abuse, right? That somebody that was their experience would be far more likely to, you know, find themselves in that situation. I think, and just another reason why, you know, those compliance-based approaches can be so harmful, you know, people don't realize. Yeah, lots there. I want to ask you about the burrito test. What is the burrito test? It jumped off the page at me again as I was looking at it. I'm like, oh, the burrito test. Okay. What is that? You kind of talk about it in housing, autonomy, and the burrito test. What is that?
Yeah, I first heard that term from Darla Burrow, who we co-lead the medical seminars together. And basically it's related to housing. So if you're in, say, a group home for housing and you're hungry at 11 p.m. because you want a snack. It's like sometimes we all do at 11 p.m. Can you go to the...
That's my daughter. I call her the raccoon sometimes because I'm in bed and I'm getting ready to fall asleep and I hear something out there and I'm like, what is that? What's the raccoon?
You're probably hearing beep, beep, beep.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. And you can't make a microwave more quiet, you know?
No. Yeah, you can't sneak the microwave.
You need a stealth mode, I think.
Exactly. And you don't want to eat the frozen. So can you get up and use the microwave and microwave yourself a burrito and chat with your friends on your phone at 11 o'clock at night in your group home? And if you can't, well, why the fuck not? Like, that's the question. Like, do you really have the autonomy and rights? Does your child really have the autonomy and rights that they deserve? if they can't, that's the burrito test.
Right.
Why do the lights have to be out? We're not 5 years old. Why do the lights have to be out at 9 o'clock? I mean, the lights go out at 9 o'clock
Right.
because maybe they hire less workers that night, or it's more convenient, or whatever. There isn't like a real reason for it. I mean, you're an adult. You should be able to have some choices. These are small choices. It's not like choosing to do something like deal drugs out of the house or something. It's a very basic thing. It's, can you or not? It's a litmus test. Unfortunately, many group homes fail that test. Many. So parents need to really be prepared, even as their child becomes an adult, to have all eyes on any housing situation that they're in. And if it's not working, to really maybe get into the deepest stage of their advocacy yet, finding best practices in other communities, meeting with local legislators, trying to get pilot programs going, trying to fix this problem with supportive housing. Even here in Ontario, sometimes people end up, because there's not enough supportive housing, they end up getting routed into seniors' homes, like seniors' nursing homes, for long periods of time where there's no way that they should be there. So this is a huge area of advocacy to be prepared for.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so important. I mean, again, thinking about an adult and an adult's rights. I mean, you want that burrito, you should be able to have that burrito. Absolutely. So getting into chapter 5. So chapter 5 kind of heads in a different direction here, but it was a familiar direction for me. And as I looked at this, I thought, wow, this really puts a lot of foundation that I think is really important for families and parents to understand. So part 5 is autism, past, present, and future. And again, being familiar with your work, as I read this, I'm like, this is very familiar with some of the things that you've done. So here you talk a little bit about kind of the history about autism diagnoses. You talk about inclusion, the Donald Triplett story, which is one I love, and maybe you can touch on that as well. Tell me a little bit about this section and what the intent was and how it relates to really helping parents to have the information they need to help support, advocate for, and support the growth of their children.
Yeah, I think I'll keep it really brief because of our time, but I think it's really important for parents to look at the last chapter or look at other things that talk about the history of the autism diagnosis, because it helps to understand the fingerprints that were left by really poor ideas in autism, as well as the legacy of the good ideas. So autism is just a descriptive diagnosis. It's just based on what's observed. And then all sorts of theories came about that ended up being wrong, such as, children are autistic because they have refrigerator mothers. Parents are too cold, or thus and such, right? What we find through history, and this is also the same for Down syndrome, is that even when the very worst ideas about these conditions were being put forth, there have always been parents who have gone, I'm a skeptic. I don't really believe you guys. We're going to do our own thing. And that was the case with Donald Triplett. He lived in a small town, and this was way back when he was supposed to be in a residential institution, and his parents pulled him out and included him in everything. And he ended up having a very inclusive life so many years ago. It's admirable even today. So that I put that story as kind of a model for what we hope to achieve broadly as a society as well. And I think it's very
and this was way back. I'm having a flip here because you were saying way back. For our younger listeners, they might be thinking way back to like the 80s or 90s. We're talking about 1943, right? So this was one of Dr. Leo Kanner's first patients, right? So a very, very different time for sure. But what made the difference was really kind of the inclusion, and it just I think it's a really amazing story, but just so lacking very often today in what people are doing.
We talk about presuming competence and co-regulating, and they just did that naturally. Now, of course, we have I interviewed a great thinker for this book, Dr. Andrew Whitehouse, and he's from Australia. And he talked about how there's like a sort of a gap in humility within the field of autism that we're trying to address. And I think understanding that history should imbue in everyone a sense of humility. And Whitehouse is doing just really interesting reviews as well about okay, what we believe works or what they believe works versus what actually works.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So as we kind of get to the wrap up here shortly, kind of in this chapter, you also talk about seeing autism in a new light, research and practice. Tell me a little bit about that. What's the new light? What's the light we need to shed to again, ultimately help individuals and help families kind of through their journeys as well?
Yeah, that was the most exciting part of the book to read and the most positive part of the book to read, because there is a huge pivot happening in autism research. Every year, there's more and more research being done that moves away from just, cause and cure lab research towards really sociological research and research on well-being and quality of life. How can we improve the quality of life for autistic people? And that's what Donald Triplett's parents did, and that's what many parents have been doing. But the research community and the therapy community lagged behind for a long time in understanding that that's really the goal. That's a goal of all families, certainly. So there's definitely a move within research. Noah Sasson and some other researchers are doing incredible work about just how autistic and non-autistic people communicate with each other so that we can take care of that gap and understand each other better, which of course leads to more compassion, more inclusion, and the empathy going both ways. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, a better world is one where we move away from a lot of these ideas kind of based on old models. I mean, kind of this medical model of deficit disorder dysfunction to, how do we remove barriers? How do we better support people? How do we understand their individual differences and support those? That work is so important. And I mean, and its root, I mean, much of that work is why we see kids that are restrained or secluded or, have other things being done to them, because we are looking at them through the wrong lens in the first place, right? Yeah. So briefly here, anyone that's watching live, if you have, we're going to be wrapping up here in just a couple minutes, but if you have a question or comment, feel free to put that in the chat. I see a couple more here. We had a comment here. It's shocking how many facilities don't allow autonomy for adults, including geriatric. Yeah, absolutely. And TBI, traumatic brain injury group homes. A huge human rights issue. Absolutely. It's interesting, kind of the issues around autonomy and, very young children, children with disabilities, and as you mentioned, kind of at the other end of things as well, our older, individuals. Have a friend in Ontario, moving city to city, trying to stay near her 16-year-old daughter who is not safe living at home. And has been moved group home to group home outside of her own hometown and away from family. It should not have to come to that. Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you have a question or comment, feel free to put that in the chat. So again, the book is The Informed Parent, and it is coming out officially tomorrow, although I think copies are beginning to ship. On the back cover, one of the great things I saw was an endorsement there from me at the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, but also one from our friend Julie Roberts, who is on here with us today. Julie Roberts, the founder of the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective, says a vital resource for parents and professionals alike. And I agree. This might be called The Informed Parent, but as you mentioned earlier, and I think the importance of getting this to professionals, getting this to therapists or others that might be supporting families, really, really critical. I did have a question for you just in terms of the book in general. We were talking about where to get it, and you shared all the places that folks can get the book. Is there an audio version by any chance?
There is, and I read the audio version.
You did it?
As read by the author, yeah.
Well, I need that because there's nothing more than I like than an audiobook that was read by the author. Because even if I read this, like knowing you, I would read it in your voice. Like your voice would be in my head. Mm-hmm. But when I listen to an audiobook, if it's someone I know and they're not reading the audiobook, it just doesn't sound right to me. It's like,
it was really interesting reading it too, because I was rereading all my words that I had written, and it was very moving because it's really through the whole journey on my own as a parent too. And
Yeah.
there it is in black and white. Yeah, it was a fun experience to
I,
be.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Yeah, in fact, you and I have talked about this before. I'm actually working on a book. It's coming along slowly but surely. And one of the things that I've said is I really want there to be an audio version because I enjoy audiobooks. And so maybe if that happens, I'll get that opportunity. So
Definitely. I mean, you're a podcaster. They'll definitely ask you to do it.
Yeah. That's great. Again, and I'm guessing that audio version will be out tomorrow as well. So I'll have to go to my Audible account and get it because I have lots of credits for some reason. So I'll be looking forward to that.
There's an ebook too. I think there's an ebook as well.
Okay, great. Sometimes I like to have the paper one and the audio version. So, I guess it's just the look. There's a lot of blue books. So I realized that recently. I was reorganizing my bookshelf. And I've seen a lot of bookshelves by color, and I'm like, this will be fun. And then I realized 90% of my books are blue. All right. So any other anything else you want to share with us about the book? I mean, certainly we want to encourage people. If you're the parent of an autistic child and you're trying to navigate, get a copy of the book. If you're a professional, you support parents, absolutely get a copy of the book as well. Do want to encourage you also to think about going to your local library, even if you buy a copy, and asking them to get a copy on their shelves because you'll be helping somebody else. Anything else you want to share about the book, Ann? Anything that we missed? We covered a bit of ground here, but anything else that we missed?
Well, I would just say that there are a lot of helpful tools for people, and it's really written for people who also want to take the information that's provided and look inside themselves. And I would just say to all parents, believe in yourself and believe in your family, believe in your child. That's the most important first step. And then everything else comes along with it.
Yeah, I love that. I've often said, believe in your child even when no one else does, right? I've been in those meetings. They're hard meetings to be in. And, hearing all these deficits and analysis of your child and see them for who they are, see them in their humanity. And again, believe in them even when no one else does. I think it will no doubt end up paying dividends in the end. And follow your instincts on some of this as well. The number one expert in the room is your child, and second to your child is you. I think that our children are the best and most knowledgeable experts on themselves, and I think the families are a very close number two. We are experts in this process, and it's really important that we're part of that. Because it's easy to look at a table full of 7 people with lots of letters after their name and think, well, they're the experts, they know best. Question these things, and we can do better for our kids. Well, I really appreciate you joining me to talk about the book today. I always am happy to get to chat with you. So it's been a while, and I was really excited before we even went live. I'm like, and it's so nice to see you. Really appreciate all the work that you do and continue to do, and the contributions that you've been making to the community, for years. Really meaningful and help to bring about positive change. I want to thank you for being here today. Again, encourage people to go check out the book, and I will give you any final words that you have as we wrap things up. Any final thoughts?
It's great to be here. AASR is an amazing organization. And the work that you've done and the toolkits that you've done, everyone should go check those out again, who hasn't had a chance to look at them in a while, because this is exactly putting into practice what we've been talking about today is the AASR. So thanks so much. It's really been a pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. So we are going to let everybody go. And if you would stick around for 10 more seconds, I just want to thank you after we go off the air here. Again, I want to thank anybody that joined us here live. Thanks for being here. If you're listening after the fact, and of course, we do these live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. After the fact, you can see it on those platforms, although YouTube is usually the best place to go. You can also download it as an audio-only podcast. If you like to listen on the go, you can go to Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you get a podcast, and listen to it. So please share these with friends, with colleagues. This is the way we get information out there and hopefully make a difference. So with that, we're going to wrap up. We will see you again, I think, next week, because we've been doing weekly shows here recently. But we've just had a lot to talk about. And again, thank you, Ann, and thank you, everybody, for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thanks.